Thank you so much, Karen. Thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you for all of you for being here. I see a lot of familiar names and faces, so it's wonderful to be in dialogue once again with you all. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, and you know, I'm hoping to take around 45 minutes for the talk and leaving time for question and answer. And I guess, like Karen said, you know, if you have questions, putting them in the chat is a great option. I can't see the chat, so I'll answer them at the end. But if you do have something that really doesn't make sense, or feel free to interrupt me as well. So the title of this presentation is Designing for Water in an Uncertain Climate and Tackling the Inequities of Tucson's Food Deserts. And so Karen invited me to really talk about the food desert study, but I wanted to also place it in a framework of the larger scope of research that I've been working on, and the larger scope of the challenges of designing, working as an architect in facing climate change, since that's the focus of your group. So as you know, climate change is uncertain, complex, and with diverse consequences. And I think this is an important point for designers, because a lot of times we see, there's a certain sustainability approach to design, and it seems like there's just a one kind of approach. But in fact, climate change, because the consequences vary so much, it's really about adaptation. There will be some places where potentially here, and you see the study from 2017, where agricultural yields potentially could go up, whereas other places they'll go down, or labor and heat and so forth. And so the point is, the agency as designers in a climate that is uncertain, complex, and diverse, I'm really saying, is about designing for adaptability, multidisciplinarity, and then also designing things that are towards multiple benefits rather than single benefit solutions. And so on the point of adaptable, I think this word resilience is coming up more and more. And as designers, a lot of times we think about the engineering resilience, meaning you design something so it's able to return back to a fixed point, a point that it's designed for. But I try to teach my students, and as a designer myself, really working towards this idea of ecological resilience, which means that you're constantly changing, and so this is the idea of adaptive capacity rather than recovery capacity. And so in my teaching, I think about this as teaching students a method rather than teaching them, a single kind of result to get a single kind of result, really teaching them the process and the method of things. And it's much more performance oriented rather than object oriented architecture, which is, I would argue, a thing of the past. Right. And so this idea of ecological resilience really requires a lot of research and collaboration, because it's a complex way to approach design. And I think, as architects, we're really, in the past, we had been really just focused solely on design, but now we're really forced to, with social issues, environmental issues, forced to really integrate more and more research into our design processes. And I really see it as an iterative cycle to continually improve the performance of things that we're designing. Buildings or urban plans or anything. And then the second point is that design is really becoming requiring multiple discipline collaboration. And this is a diagram from a recent paper that I published with some different colleagues across the University of Arizona in engineering and in hydrology and atmospheric sciences and in geography. And the blue area is really where I work, and the work I'll be sharing with you today is, in this built environment, built systems, adaptive and responsive solutions and policy. But it's, you see that we also, natural systems are incredibly important, especially, this is specifically talking about net zero urban water, but natural systems we can think of as the ceiling and supply, and then the social systems being the foundation and demand. And what I'm striving to do in my work and in the research that supports that design is really responding to these chronic stressors and acute shocks. So you see these long-term and short-term drivers of change, whether that's in the social system, like population growth or regulation and code changes, or in the natural systems, climate change, aquifer and surface water level changes, or these acute shocks of flooding, earthquakes, and natural disasters. And so this is the paper that came out of this collaboration on net zero urban water. And we worked to come up with this idea of 3 different scopes of water. I'll be talking a lot about water today, but the idea here is, I'm sure you all are familiar with the different carbon scopes, but we're looking at scoping water. So scope 1 being across built and social, really utility scale. Scope 2 across natural, social, and built. So thinking about watershed and aquifer, and then the scope 3 being virtual water. And so you can see these rings, and the hard lines are built engineered systems, centralized and decentralized systems, and then the light kind of colored blobs underneath are the social systems at work that underpin a lot of this, whether it's public environmental values, maintenance and policy, public acceptance, environmental justice, things like that. And another example of some multidisciplinary work is with the colleagues that I worked with on the food desert work, which I'll use the second half of my presentation really to dive into in more detail. But this was our first paper together, which was looking at rainwater as a renewable resource to achieve net zero urban water in Tucson. And so the question here was really, you hear this fact that more water falls on Tucson by volume over the course of a year than we actually use. And so it all seems really like simple and amazing from that end, like, well, why aren't we using more of our rainwater? But the built environment, the systems needed to harvest that rainwater and to channel that rainwater and to use it within our urban area, has a lot more limiting factors, right? The roof, the size of roofs, how you channel that water and treat it, how it's divided up between households and densities of uses and so forth. And so this study looked at all those factors using remote sensing, census data, and so forth, even looking down to the runoff coefficients of the roof types by material. And we quantified basically how much the size of a cistern, the small size of a cistern possible for each 1 mile by 1 mile square of Tucson to reach net zero water independence, essentially. And so you can see basically the lighter color areas are each household would need about a 5,000 gallon tank. And then these darker blues are something around a 10,000 gallon tank. And it's in cubic meters for our international audience, but I'm translating it to you in gallons. And then there were some areas that were a lot higher and a little more impractical. But and then you also see these dots here, which is the numbers from Tucson Water in terms of their rebate program for active rainwater harvesting in the size tanks that exist throughout Tucson. And so the green dots are in areas where those tanks are actually compliant at the household level to contribute to water independence. And then, of course, the red dots are places that would need a lot more storage capacity to help contribute towards net zero water. This is our method. I'm not going to dive into this, but it's basically using a lot of remote sensing data, LiDAR data, orthophoto, NDVI data to construct all these different data sets to basically get to both the passive and active system harvesting potential for the water supply, and then also the demand, the indoor and outdoor irrigation demands. And this is the dynamic calculation with sizing the cistern. And here are the results, really where what I shared with you, where we're meeting 100% of imported residential water with an assumed 30% conservation. And there's a larger version of the map. Another point here, it's not just multiple disciplines that need to work together, it's multiple sectors, right? And so a lot of my teaching work also works with public, private, and academic partners, producing solutions or visioning products for some of our urban challenges. And this is one example from 2019, where we worked with Tucson Water, Pima County Flood Control, City of Tucson, Pima County Wastewater, wonderful community mentors that came in, and we looked at 5 different kinds of water: groundwater, stormwater, rainwater, gray water, reclaimed water, with these different experts, and they paired with architecture students to actually design prototype solutions to how we actually integrate these 5 different kinds of water to retrofit our urban environments. And they looked at retrofitting downtown Tucson for this. We put on a big exhibit in downtown at the end of this, and here's some examples of some prototype cards. So also, working outside of disciplines, but also across sectors as well. And here's some other products from some of that work. Okay, and then lastly, multiple benefits. And this is where I'm going to get to the food desert work shortly. But I think this is something that I'm really quite passionate about, and I think is really important. A lot of our, I work largely on more, I would say, urban infrastructure. And a lot of the way that we approached urban infrastructure in the past has really been to, I'd say, like a fixed performance target, right? And it's like an engineered solution. So, a pipe has to carry X amount of water, out of the city. And that's what it's designed to do. And it's going to do that one thing really well. But I think we're entering a period now where we see infrastructure as much more as multi-benefit, right? And so it has social values, it has environmental values. It's not just doing one thing really well, but it should be designed to work across multiple benefits. And so I'll be talking a lot about that, and also with the food desert work. And I think that's really important too, because it's a value proposition for our cities as well. We're not just paying to put a pipe in the ground, but say we're paying for green infrastructure that's going to address many different problems across the city. And that's certainly going to challenge the ways, and is challenging the ways that city agencies are split up, and it's requiring, like I've said in the other parts of the presentation, a lot more collaboration. So this work is looking at our urban transportation system and flood vulnerability in Tucson. And so here you can see flooding depth by feet in a typical storm event in Tucson. And what we did was then we looked at where the flooding was occurring across our transportation system, and not just cars, which is normally what's looked at, flooding in cars, but we also looked at across our bicycle lanes and our bus stop boarding areas. And why we're interested in this is because we've then taken these priority locations across vehicle, bus/pedestrian and bicycle, and looked at, well, if we apply comprehensive green infrastructure throughout the public right-of-way in these areas, what does this do to address the accessibility of our public transportation system? So this is really important, because I think a lot of times we're trying to, as designers or environmental advocates, say for green infrastructure, for example, or trying to make the case to our transportation engineers, hey, this is really important, but we're not really translating it into metrics that they're familiar with and motivated by. And so accessibility is certainly one of them. And so, really trying to make the case for these different types of designs, new kinds of like soft infrastructure, multiple benefit infrastructure, in a way that our different urban actors understand. And so here's some work out of our design studio that I taught with students, looking at specifically Camino Miramonte, We designed also a whole bike boulevard. I'll show you in the next slide. But you can see they were, really thinking about this in terms of a kit of parts that we can then deploy across an urban area, across our streets in Tucson to fit all these different conditions. And this is, we're sponsored, studio sponsored by the Tucson Department of Transportation and Mobility, looking at this Prop 407 Bicycle Boulevard. Prop 407 is our Parks and Connectors bond. And so this is a funded bicycle boulevard cutting basically from the Rito River all the way down to Aviation Parkway, going through Reed Park. And the students designed this bicycle boulevard to deal with the flooding, the different flooding that was occurring, as well as working with those neighborhood associations to develop, seeing the bicycle boulevard as actually an armature of potentially of social services, and what could also be added besides just moving bicycles and cars across it. So it's another idea of multiple benefits, right? That it's not just for bicycles, or it's not just for cars, but our streets are actually places that provide shade and social spaces, and provide, can potentially alleviate flooding and, reduce heat island, and provide all these different benefits to them, that they're an armature of these services for the city. Another point in my work too is, I think that, and you'll see this in the food desert work, is that it's important that as architects, as designers, this is a studio I taught where we had 8 projects. And we're really thinking about it in terms of aggregate benefit. And so we can be one designer, working on a site over here, but if we're designing in such a way, especially for water, this was looking at passive and active systems, integrating that into design, that we can really create an aggregate benefit across the city if we're all designing this way. And these are the 8 projects again, and these different pie pieces are the 8 projects. And you can see the active system and the passive system they were designed with, the water being captured, and the water uses that they're all being channeled to here. And so that's that idea of aggregate benefit across the city. And so now on to the food desert work. So I think you'll see threads of everything that I've been talking about in this food desert work, in terms of my approach to design, and really thinking about solutions for a city in a changing climate, and especially under water stress. And so, like Karen said, this paper that I'm talking about was published in Landscape and Urban Planning, and it's looking at how to optimize food production to address food deserts in Tucson, in an area with restricted water access. And so I'm sure you all have heard likely that Tucson has more food deserts than the average city. And that's a USDA definition. Here it is: low-income census tracts with substantial number or share of residents with low levels of access to retail outlets selling healthy and affordable foods. And that's the definition. And so when you look at the census data and you do the mapping, we have almost 94,000 people, or 17.8% of the city population, living in food deserts. And here's the hatched areas are the food deserts by census tract, block, group tract. And then the colors are the poverty rate mapped in with that. And so, then the question, I read you the definition of food desert. So then I think, the going idea had been that, well, we need to put more grocery stores in these areas, that grocery stores are prioritizing areas with middle and upper income, because that's where the consumers are. And so these areas of the city with lower income are not being prioritized for grocery store, for private business grocery stores. And so here's the mapping of the chain stores and the independent stores in Tucson. But what recent research in the last decade has really pointed to is, in fact, that putting grocery stores in food deserts doesn't actually change people's access to healthy foods that much because fruits and vegetables are expensive. And also because how we cook and eat is cultural, and it's ingrained, you know, and it's sort of set behavior. And so solutions that have, however, been pointed to as successful in the research have been community gardens, and largely for the idea that these areas promote, you know, education on fruits and vegetables, but also provide people to low cost access to healthy fruits and vegetables. And so Tucson has some really great examples of community gardens that are working in this space. And on municipal land. So Las Malpitas is on county flood control land, and is a community garden really led by Food Bank of Southern Arizona. Mission Gardens, also something on county land. And Flowers and Bullets is on Tucson United School District vacated premise. And so, you know, looking at these current successful examples of mitigating food deserts, utilizing vacant county and city land, and talking to, you know, different county officials about this, you know, so we pose the question, is urban farming, you know, so urban farming seems like a great solution, but is it ecologically responsible in areas of high urban water stress? So is it ecologically responsible if we decided to, you know, proliferate urban agriculture throughout Tucson? Is that really a solution, or are we only making our urban water challenges worse? So we're interested in that question. And then really to frame it in terms of our research, we asked, what is Tucson's capacity to meet its food desert nutritional demands with its available municipal land and its sustainable water resources? So that's what we set out to do. We identified all the different food desert block groups, the populations living within them, and then we wondered, can we meet their nutritional demands with our available municipal land and only using sustainable water resources, not relying on Tucson water, our potable water system. And so by sustainable water resources, we looked at 3 different kinds of water sources. So active rainwater harvesting, passive rainwater harvesting, and then reclaimed water pipeline. And so to give you a little bit more detail, the active rainwater harvesting, we basically looked at all adjacent roofs surrounding an area of vacant municipal land where we could put, where we could cultivate food. So we, again, using remote sensing and LiDAR, isolating all those rooftops. And then we looked at, you'll see in the results, we looked at a few different types of investments, sizes. We looked at, well, if the food cultivation area invested in a 1,600 gallon tank or 3,200 gallon tank or a 10,000 gallon tank. And then passive water harvesting was basically isolating the road surface that would drain, that would shed into that food cultivation area, vacant piece of municipal land, assuming we could have a curb cut or something channeling the water in there for food cultivation. So again, using LiDAR and orthophoto to isolate those areas. And then thirdly, we looked at reclaimed water. And, you know, so those other 2, you would call them decentralized infrastructure, or reclaimed water is centralized infrastructure. It's redistributed, treated effluent. And you can see the pipeline here in this map. And so what you see there is in the red is the food desert block groups, areas that are classified as food deserts, Tucson boundary, and then the vacant land per capita. So I think what's important here is that you'll see a likely inverse correlation, right? If you have a lot of land, maybe you have less people living in a block group. And so, you know, you have a lot of land, but lower nutritional demands. But then in other areas, if you have a lot of people, you have less land. So you have a lot of nutritional needs, but less land to meet it. And so this density was interesting to us as well. So any place that was within 200 feet of reclaimed water pipeline we assumed could be watered by reclaimed water. Okay. And then the last piece that we were really interested in here was this idea of collaboration, because of this correlation, or because of this dynamic between population density and available land. So we said, this is, really interesting. So right now, the current isolated model, we're in a block group, we're going to grow some land, or we're going to grow some food, excuse me. And we have a food desert population, and that we're going to, grow a certain amount of food to meet that population. So you can see here how that dynamic that I was telling you about. But we thought, well, what about a future cooperative model where, and we do this in a lot of ways, like with community supported agriculture and different initiatives in our city currently. But we were curious in looking at this collaboration between different food desert block groups. And so in our results, you'll see that we have 3 scenarios. So in scenario A, there's full collaboration, meaning, if these are 5 different block groups, anyone can trade with anyone else. Okay, so the food grown in one area can meet the nutritional demands of another area. Scenario B, we said you can only collaborate with your neighbor, your adjacent neighbor. So if you're touching, you can use the food produced in one area for the other. And then scenario C is no collaboration, that only the food you grow in your block group can you use to meet the nutritional demands of that block group. And so here's the planting profile that we used. And, of course, we had, a whole rhythm of planting and growing in different seasons for food. But basically here are the results, the big headlines. And so scenario A, where there's full collaboration, we found out that in Tucson that you can more than meet the nutritional demands of every block group with the available, if you cultivate the available municipal land in that area. Scenario B, where there was just that adjacent collaboration, we found that, and again, this is just limited with reclaimed water and just the rainwater that could be captured, that you can meet about 80% of the nutritional demands in that area. And then scenario C, where there's no collaboration, you could only meet between 35 to 56% of the nutritional demands in those areas. And so you can see how important collaboration is to solving this issue as well. So this research has gotten a lot of different press and television and a few different places. It was just mentioned in Desert Leaf. And so, our next step is a fall studio that I'm teaching. So this upcoming fall 2021, which is looking at, it's sponsored by GLHN, Architects and Engineers, I should say, and it's looking at designing prototypes for implementation. So we're looking at parcels of available municipal land, and we want to approach this in terms of prototypes, because then a prototype can be duplicated throughout the city. And so our first idea is community garden, then affordable housing. Another idea is using floodplain land like Las Milpitas, controlled agriculture, and then a community food hub, and finally the idea of backyard farming for income patching, which is really an idea I've heard Julie Robinson talk about at the county. And so to conclude, across all that work, and specifically the food desert work, I think that you see that designing for water in an uncertain climate really requires solutions to be adaptable, multidisciplinary, and multiple benefits. And it requires a lot of this research and collaboration, and this cycle, the optimization of our urban systems like food systems, water systems, transportation systems that I shared with you, and the idea of that community engagement's really necessary towards this optimization. And so with that, I will conclude, and it looks like, I left plenty of time for questions. I know I covered a lot of material, maybe a bit quickly, so I'm happy to dive into anything in more detail.
So I'm gonna open it up, you have to remember to unmute yourself. I was interested, I'll just start. Anyone wants to jump in. On your map of food deserts, it looks like Flowing Wells area is a large section. Is that true? It's hard for me.
Yeah, Flowing Wells definitely has food desert issues. Let me pull up the map so you can talk about it. Yeah, up in this area.
Yeah, and I saw on your website some work you were doing in Flowing Wells, and I didn't quite understand it, I'll admit it, about streets that flooded and how you were turning them into pedestrian parks and walking spaces. And I got the impression it was about using those washes, getting rid of the streets and using those waterways as natural irrigation and everything for parks and green, canopies. Is that correct?
Well, I can speak the work that my students have done in Flowing Wells and in collaboration with Pima County Flood Control. We were designing, we weren't tearing up streets. It was actually an area called Runway. It was called Runway Drive, but it was basically this old runway. There was an airport a long time ago in Flowing Wells. And so it's this strange kind of industrial strip of land, and there's a lot of flooding there. And so the students redesigned it. Right now it houses cars and some Suntran buses and things like that. But the students redesigned it to be a large municipal park with huge basins, basically to take water off the streets and roads, and to infiltrate that water, or at least slow it down so it could be released more slowly into the street over time.
Yeah, I mean, also in your study, and it's fairly known that the native indigenous people here had the irrigation up north of us, and then the Tohono O'odham had what, someone can correct me, it's flooding irrigation where they would plant the squash and the beans in the washes to catch the rain from the monsoon. And it's like you're trying to replicate something we've done that was done 2,500 years ago. Is all of this possible? I mean, it seems like it is possible, but what do you have to do to convince the city, the county, the communities to be involved in something like this?
Yeah, well, I mean, the reason my co-authors and I in geography do this kind of work is to say
cutting out.
What is possible within all the resources that we have. But from that hopeful point way into the future and into the current day, there's a long road to get there. And I think I think the city and the county have passionate, really motivated people working towards a lot of these solutions, working with each other, so flood control, working with Tucson Water, working with Department of Transportation. And so I think for one vision I could imagine for the use of available municipal land is the idea of the county actually leasing this land for a minimal amount to small scale farmers, and this land actually being cultivated. Since it is dormant, why not open it up? And I think one outcome of the study could be that because we've quantified the amount of potential food that can be cultivated in these different parcels, the idea would be that maybe that gives the county a way, some parameters of their lease structure of that available municipal land. So I think that the next step would be the county being willing to lease out the land to small scale farmers.
Well, that's pretty exciting. They do address food in their countywide plan. I'm sorry, I forgot the title.
Right.
And also they address the food that is naturally grown in the desert. as
Right.
a food
Yeah.
source, which is interesting. I have one, let's see, it's from Kurt. I live in a community bordering Vale. There's nothing but fast food restaurants there. Is that not a food desert? How do we convince people that eating junk food is just as bad as no food at all?
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly really sympathetic to that, and that's an excellent point. And yeah, it's not directly my wheelhouse in terms of my research, so I don't want to pretend that I have the answer on how to get people to change that kind of behavior. But I know that there's a lot of great people at U of A working on maybe more of the kind of behavior change or public health aspects. It's really important. Yeah.
Anyone else have a question?
I have a question.
Please, go ahead.
Have you done any surveys of the targeted population and within the areas that they live in to see if they're interested in doing not backyard gardening, but communal gardening?
Yeah, I have not. But I know that there's some amazing organizations in Tucson who are working on that. Community Gardens of Tucson, I know they're looking at maybe looking to expand in more low-income areas. And the Community Food Bank of Southern Arizona, I know, is working with a lot of different populations to locate new areas, potential areas for urban farming. So no, I haven't done that on the ground research.
I have a question. Have you factored in the impact that you might have of local community gardening on the other food distribution systems that we have now, like the food bank and Market on the Move and some of the others, in which food that would go wasted elsewhere is being redistributed through or distributed throughout our community, and especially for people who can't afford food.
Yeah, thank you, Barbara. That's a great source of food and a great point, in terms of things that it's normally wasted. And a great point, linking to collaboration. I have not looked at that. Like I said, this study, you heard the parameters of it. We were just really looking at kind of the water issue and municipal vacant land. But I think that's a really excellent issue, and certainly those where our food distribution kind of falls down, fixing those inefficiencies is really important.
I'll jump in, I guess. So I work with Community Gardens of Tucson, and 2 or 3 things that you raised I wanted to at least explore for a sec. One is, it's always been our understanding that reclaimed water is not appropriate to use in growing vegetables. So focusing very much attention or energy on reclaimed water, unless it's unless it's treated more than it is now, seems like maybe an unfair water asset to include in your calculations. As you probably know, many of the Community Gardens of Tucson gardens are on church property, school property, and some are in parks. So I don't think parks usually count as vacant land, but they are public land, municipal land. However, and maybe this is way beyond your study, but what we've learned is that oftentimes the conflicts between Tucson Water and its rate structure for water and Tucson Parks and Rec in terms of their bureaucracy and management are not only not supportive of each other, but very much at odds with each other. So the idea of saying municipal makes it sound like either the city or the county will smoothly agree to something. But in actuality and in our past experience, there have been a lot of difficulties in working through that. And just one quick example is Tucson Water has a special rate for community gardens if you have a dedicated water meter, which costs $5,000.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we've ponied up $5,000 for a few gardens so we could have our own meter and get a cheaper rate, but the payback is very long. And the idea of the city providing a free water meter has met with reactions ranging from laughter to leaving the room. So there's definitely some hurdles in terms of what what you can expect from or what you can get from the municipality. And there's a bunch of different level of policy and bureaucratic changes to make it work. Having said all that, I think it'd be great to use more of the municipal land for farming at various levels. And we do have a bunch of gardens and are planning on expanding, as you mentioned, into different areas.
Yeah.
I want to quickly jump in quickly, Courtney.
Yeah, I want to answer the reclaimed water because we did look at that.
Okay.
I have a specific parameter, but what were you going to say, Karen?
Well, I get a request for you to show the park graphic again.
The part. Okay, well, let me
Okay,
do
go
that
ahead.
in a
That
second
is the
because
request.
I'm not immediately.
Yeah.
It's not immediately coming to mind what you mean by that. So I'll have to ask. But I did want to respond to the reclaimed water piece because that's a really good point and important. So we followed the parameters of Arizona Department of Environmental Quality that we only use reclaimed water on things that we weren't directly irrigating, meaning like orchards.
Sure.
So if it were like fruit trees, but we didn't apply it to say carrots or potatoes or things where it would directly attach the plant. So we did divide it out. So thank you for highlighting that.
No, and that makes sense too. And that is a great source of water if you're close to one of those lines.
Yeah. But I thought you raised some really important points about municipal collaboration. And yeah, a lot of this land is floodplain land too, county floodplain land. So yeah, at any rate, okay. You wanted me to share my screen.
Jana, can you clarify what park graphic?
It was right before the transportation map. I thought it was a park one. It went by faster than I could grasp it.
Okay. Tell me. I'm hoping you can see. No, this is park.
You're going too far back, but
Tell me more. What?
it might be soon after this one. Let's see, what is that?
This is the transportation one. This is the
Oh.
Camino Miramonte.
Oh, maybe that one.
This
I
is
thought that
the
was about
Bicycle Boulevard.
Oh yeah, it was the one before this one.
This one.
Yeah, that I didn't catch.
And then you had a question, Jana, about any chance of growing gardens or heritage fruit trees in parks.
I think it's a great idea. I think absolutely. I mean, I don't work for the city, so I don't want to get myself in trouble. But I think the green with Prop 407. Hopefully you guys are all familiar with the Parks and Connectors bond. And so if you go on the Prop 407 website, they've scoped out what's going in, what they're funding for different parks. But I think it's following that timeline is an excellent way to advocate for additional things that aren't going to cost that much money, but when the city is actually going into these parks. Or you can imagine the new green stormwater infrastructure fee. They could pair that with the Prop 407 stuff to add green infrastructure in the parks, like fruit trees and so forth. With some more developed passive stormwater harvesting. I think it's an excellent idea. Yeah. And it sounds like Community Gardens of Tucson is doing some of that work too.
Yeah, I was noticing that one park, I can't think of the name of it right now, but that's up by the place where you ride your bike along the river. There's a park there, and there were like old fruit trees and stuff like that. I think there were actually old almond trees because they used to grow them in that area. And then there were a lot of mesquite trees too that, but they were like even watering the fruit trees with emitters, which not the fruit trees, the mesquite trees, which don't need to be watered with emitters, but there was like nothing going on with like any kind of passive rainwater harvesting there that could have like, made that, that those sources of food more viable.
Yeah. Yeah, and I was just out at the Rialto, where the Rialto Farmers Market is, and I saw I'm probably way behind on this, but I saw they paved everything, and I was like, with no green infrastructure, but it's right next to the river. But yeah, it's definitely you see those missed opportunities for sure all the time. So.
Yeah, that's so frustrating when you see like the neighbors like doing something where they could have done some rainwater harvesting in their yard, and then they put all the plastic and gravel in their yard. And you miss the opportunity.
Looks like there's a couple other hands raised.
Please go ahead. I can't see, unfortunately, I can't see you, the hands, so just go for it.
I'll go first.
Please.
Scott, go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay. First off, thank you very much. That was super, super interesting, and I really enjoyed sort of the science. But to sort of pick up on what a number of other people have hit on is, I'm really curious about sort of outreach to the communities themselves and sort of efforts to translate this to the, ordinary people of Tucson, and maybe more from a social science perspective, engage the community and their response.
Mhm.
Could you just talk a little bit about that, if that's part of what you're doing? Or
Yeah, that has not been part of what we're doing. We've been looking at kind of big data sets and modeling, but I think it's a really important part of it, and I hope in the fall when teaching this food system studio with the students, and actually right now we're trying to figure out what parcels we are going to design, but with the studios that I teach with the students, they always do community outreach with the wards that they're working within, and also with the neighborhood associations as well. So hopefully we'll be doing a bit more community outreach with that. So yeah.
can I just follow just real quick, and then I'll be quiet? But those community outreach efforts often seem to be these very top-down sort of mission-driven things, as opposed to actually sort of outreach where the community is actually telling the people that are listening what the community wants. And I guess I just maybe encourage that there be some thought given to that, making some of this a little less of a planning top down, this is what's going to happen to you, and more of a, where do you guys fit in this? How do you think about this? And just a thought.
Yeah, no, I think yes, I think that's, incredibly important. And the point of the research was simply to at least dispel the myth that we couldn't expand our urban agriculture because of our limited water availability, or urban water stress. So that was really the point. But I think you're absolutely right. If we're going to have any efforts going forward with this, it really has to be bottom up and led because the community wants to do it, and otherwise the community farms won't survive. It's really yeah. Thank you.
Priya, I'm sorry for mispronouncing your name. Did you want to go? You had a question.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. I think so. I have maybe two questions. One is following on Bruce's question about the appropriateness of reclaimed water. Does gray water have a place in this discussion, or does it lack the infrastructure that the other kinds of water would have? And then my second question is about the definition of vacant land, that when you buy them on the map, are what constitutes vacant land? Is it already disturbed land that could be repurposed now for this kind of thing, or is it like pristine kind of desert that one might have a harder time trying to develop for this purpose?
Yeah, really excellent questions. Maybe I'll go second to first because the second question is a little faster than the first in terms of answering. The vacant land, I know vacant can be a very actually tricky term, but correct. It's land that's already been developed or touched. It's not it's not preserved land or what we call like pre-development land. So it's already had human interventions on it. And the first question is a good one. We did not look at gray water harvesting, but that is, I think, an important alternative water source. And I suppose to do that, we would need to figure out basically the neighboring houses to those parcels, figure out their amount of water use, like in terms of their shower and their laundry water, to be able to quantify that. And then even to see if they could do, I mean, laundry, almost every building can do laundry to gray water, but a lot of buildings, if they're on a concrete foundation and the pipes are in the concrete foundation, and you really can't adapt the showers for gray water harvesting. So we could do that. I think we just have to dive in and get those water quantities, and then also understand the kinds of buildings that we were dealing with. But gray water is great because, like reclaimed water, as long as the person's in the house taking a shower every day, it's a consistent flow of water, which is different from rainwater harvesting. So you see that, like, if you can layer these alternative water sources, it's much more resilient in terms of water supply. And as was pointed out, if reclaimed water and gray water can really only be used for certain kinds of agriculture, then the rainwater harvesting can just be used for, like, the root vegetables and so forth. So I think, smart design is multiple sources of water.
Just brainstorming on that idea, I was wondering if, like, there's anything you can do if we put in, like, more solar panels. Is there ways to harvest water off your solar panels? And also, if there's big, like, department stores, that have big air conditioners, the condensation from the air conditioners. I don't know if any of the, I don't even know if the solar thing is a thing, but I know that you can grow gardens under the solar panels because they're doing it at Monzo Elementary.
Yeah, those agrivoltaics, I think, are a great opportunity to harvest rainwater for the crop production. And I'm sure Greg Baron-Gafford's and their team, their group has looked at that. I mean, it seems like that they should have looked at it. You just need a gutter, like a surface and a gutter, and then to direct the water. Of course, a cistern to store it if you want to do active harvesting and store the water over dry periods, or use the water over dry periods.
Because, like, every parking lot in Tucson ought to have some solar panels over it to shade it, to make it a better experience, and to, harvest the sun. But
yeah, absolutely. And this is, again, the idea of multi-benefit infrastructure that we really need to be thinking, like, in an integrated way about, what we're putting in our city, and that the infrastructure is not just for a single purpose, but can serve some of our other aligned goals.
Yeah, I'd like to do something on agrivoltaics. I was reading that work up at Biosphere. And combination of solar and actually the plants provide moisture for the solar panels, which can freeze up, so to speak, under really high heat, high temperatures. So they work together.
Yeah, so if you do that, you might contact Monzo. They were actually on a national production, talking about school gardens, talking about that, how they did that.
One other comment that I'd throw in, jumping off what Priya suggested. I know she's a lawyer, and my recollection is that there might be some legal issues with taking gray water across property lines. My memory is that the current law on gray water requires you to keep it on your property. So, minor point, but it reminds me that a number of these things are great ideas that might require some additional work on the legal end of things to lay the groundwork for things, for different programs or different solutions that otherwise seem obvious, but for some reason are butting up against some existing laws, some better and some worse. The other thing I wanted to throw in is that I didn't see that you had farmers markets anywhere, although you mentioned the Rito, and the parking lot there is usually full because of the farmers market. Mm-hmm. And I was curious if farmers markets were rolled into what you called independent stores on your food store graph, because if independent stores meant Circle K, then it goes right back to the comment from whomever about Vail. It's really not a food store. I mean, some people think Quick Trip should get a big plus because they actually have apples and bananas. But I'm not exactly sure what independent stores are. And some people have suggested that while having stores nearby might not be the solution, if you can figure out a way to have neighborhood stores that people are used to using in particularly low-income neighborhoods where a lot of people don't have transportation, that's more likely to have some benefit than a big Fry's or Bosch's that's a mile or two away.
Mm-hmm. Well, I didn't do that work. Our graduate students in geography did that work and under the advisement of my co-author. So I can't answer that directly, but my understanding is independent stores means more things like Johnny Gibson's or just not your huge retail stores, but smaller markets. Rincon Market, what is it? Flora Market Run, like things like that. Time Market.
There's also the opportunity because there's so much food waste, all the produce that was thrown into the landfills, and so Market on the Move and Powwow, that they have, you can get 72 pounds of produce that's almost, some of it ready to go bad, but for $10, but there could be a way to also have like some kind of fruit stands or something in those neighborhoods where that would be distributed in more places. Right now, we go, my husband rides his bike and goes to pick it up in his little cart in the back. But it's like sometimes only one location, but if you, make one of those locations and, some of those locations in the, the poorer neighborhoods that don't have access to fresh vegetables.
Yeah. Yeah.
Couple of things that a couple of comments. One is it's great work to reframe a whole bunch of these issues, and I think in a really important way that creates the potential for acceptance, both in the political and the general public realm for doing a bunch of these things. And facts and data don't always convince people, but the lack of them, is often a real barrier. Another thing, there's been some really good work done on mapping out the sort of the regulatory approval landscape for codes, standards, policies, etc. A lot of that came out of the Living Building Challenge and Net Zero Water. There's some really great sort of graphics showing all the various approvals related to water, for a built project and where the obstacles are and what they are. And they've been really effective in changing public policies, laws, codes, standards, etc. Another thing that I noticed is a pattern that's actually well represented in your research, which is for years I've been trying to get the civil engineering community and the permaculture community to talk to each other, because the civil engineering community is generally about taking distributed problems and aggregating them into a large scale problem that requires a large scale solution like stormwater and wastewater systems, etc. And the permaculture approach is taking, water falling out of the sky, not as a problem, but an opportunity, and figuring out distributed solutions. The civil engineering community has extraordinary technical capabilities for, modeling, predicting, designing, all of that stuff. The permaculture community has this great integrated sort of view of, looking at multiple aspects of whatever is, being done. And so, I like a lot of that sort of synergy that's there. Another thing that popped up, are you familiar with the work that Tree People did in Los Angeles around demonstrating that that you could eliminate a lot of the stormwater, the big stormwater projects by doing, on-site water harvesting, earthworks, cisterns, etc. They have done some really fabulous work. Brad Lancaster actually wrote about a bunch of that stuff in, I think, his first water harvesting book. And the last thing, my last comment, going to the comments about, how you engage with the public and particularly, neighborhoods and communities is.
Sorry, I really had a hard deadline at 5:30. I have some family responsibilities and they're looking at me,
Oh,
so
no.
I'm so
No,
sorry,
no
but
problem.
I'm gonna have to go. But excellent questions, and thank you so much for having me. And
Thank you.
and yeah, those were really good points. And please feel free to stay without me. I'm so sorry. But yeah.
Thank you so much, Courtney. Thank you.
Thank you,
Really
Courtney.
appreciate it.
Thank
Really
Good to see you.
Thanks. Nice to see you all. Wonderful to see familiar faces. Bye.
Yeah, okay. Take care of your. Okay.
I know that family thing.
Yeah, we all respond to the family thing. Well, thank you for showing up, coming by and asking questions. And sorry, I didn't see the hand raising feature. It's a learning process on Zoom for me.
Is that in the, do they show up on the participants list?
Well, I've been trying to figure out, I won't get into it, some of how I can put up a graphic, blah, blah, blah. And so I changed my settings. So I couldn't see everybody. And
You
so
see
I
that
can
right there that
now
I just,
can see you, but when she had
I just put there.
when she had her file, when she had her slide up, I only saw her. I didn't see anybody else. So I apologize. Like, what hands? Where are the people? I don't know. Where are the people? Anyway, great questions. It could have been a lot more, I'm sure, at the top. Barbara, do you have a question? Good.
You're muted.
But
Barbara.
there could have been a lot more. I think this is there are so many solutions that I wish we could start seeing, but I love the comment. Was it you, Scott, that we really need it from the community up to let the people in power know what we want. And there's ideas of gardens and solar panels all over the place. And I'm still, kind of hooked on the trailer, the mobile homes. There's so many things that can be done. And we just saw, Barbara and I just saw a report that solar and trailers, I mean, that's a great marriage that takes care of a lot of problems with living in an older trailer, a mobile home. But anyway, I could talk a lot. I will let you go, and I'll be posting the recording by tomorrow. So thanks again, and see you hopefully hands raised. See you next.
Thanks for setting this up, and I relate to how you felt for those 2 months.
I'm confused. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Karen.
Bye.